I pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Community Hall just as the last streaks of sunset slipped behind the buildings of Burnaby. The air had that sharp late October bite that creeps through your jacket and settles in your bones. I hadn't planned to be there. I'd just finished my evening walk and decided to cut through the lot to avoid the congestion on Kingsway. I expected empty benches and locked doors. Instead, I saw them. My son, Daniel, sat hunched on a wooden bench near the entrance. Beside him was my granddaughter, Lily, her legs dangling above the pavement. A backpack rested at her feet, and balanced carefully on her lap was a handmade solar system, foam planets painted by hand, wire rings looping around Saturn. But what stopped me cold were the suitcases. 2 of them, old, scuffed, the kind you grab when you don't have a plan, only a deadline. Daniel looked up when he noticed me. Even in the dim light, I could see how worn he looked. He was 43, but his eyes carried a tiredness that had nothing to do with age. "Dad," he said quietly, "didn't know you walked this way." "I don't usually." I sat beside him, my knees protesting. "What's going on? Why aren't you at work?" He exhaled slowly, like someone letting go of a bad dream they were still trapped inside. "I got laid off this morning. Budget cuts. Last in, first out." Lily stared at me with those wide hazel eyes she'd inherited from her mother. She was 8 years old and trying very hard to look brave. "Grandpa, are we going to live with you now?" I turned to Daniel. "What happened?" He rubbed his face with both hands. "Her mother happened. Eleanor Whitmore." The name came out sharp, bitter. "When I got home after they let me go, I thought Clara would understand. We'd figure it out. But her mom was already there. She's been staying with us for weeks. And she," his voice cracked, "she said this proved Clara married beneath her, said I was never going to be anything, said our family didn't belong with theirs." I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not rage, not yet, just a cold, focused clarity. "And Clara?" I asked. Daniel swallowed. "She asked me to leave, just for a few days, said her mother needed space, said maybe this would help everyone think." He gestured toward the suitcases. I packed what I could, picked Lily up from after school. I didn't know where else to go. "You should have called me." "I know, I just didn't know how." I looked at Lily. She was hugging her project tightly. One side of Saturn's rings was bent. "Did you eat dinner?" I asked her. She shook her head. I stood up. Decision made. "Come on, get in the car, both of you." "Dad, I can't just—" "Daniel," I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Get in the car." Something in my tone landed. He stood, grabbed the suitcases. I took one. It was heavier than it looked. Lily slipped her hand into mine as we walked. "Grandpa, are you mad at us?" I squeezed her hand. "No, sweetheart, not at all." "Then who were you mad at?" I smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Nobody you need to worry about." The drive to my place took 20 minutes. Daniel stared out the window the whole way. Lily fell asleep in the back seat, her head resting against her project. I watched her in the mirror and felt my chest tighten. My house wasn't much, a small, aging bungalow I'd lived in for over 30 years, peeling paint, a roof that would need work soon, but it was paid off, warm and steady. When we pulled into the driveway, finally, Daniel spoke. "I'm sorry, Dad." "For what?" "For proving her right." I turned off the engine. "The only mistake you made was marrying into a family that confuses status with worth." He looked at me stunned. "She called you a nobody, said Sophie deserved better than to grow up around failure." I opened the door. "Let's get Lily inside." We carried the bags in. Lily woke just enough to walk. I set her up in the spare room, my old office, with the daybed I'd kept for years. Daniel took the couch. I made grilled cheese and tomato soup. Simple food, real food. Lily ate slowly, then I read her a chapter from her favorite book before tucking her in. When I returned to the kitchen, Daniel sat at the table, head in his hands. I poured coffee for both of us. "Tell me everything." And he did. He talked for a long time about how Eleanor Whitmore had never truly accepted him, not from the beginning, how she'd smiled in public and cut him down in private, how every holiday dinner came with subtle reminders of which schools mattered, which last names opened doors, which people were merely tolerated. Clara had defended him for years, or at least he thought she had. But after her father died and Eleanor moved in temporarily, things shifted, slowly, quietly, until the day Daniel lost his job and the mask finally came off. "I thought love was enough," he said, staring into his coffee. "I thought if I worked hard, stayed decent, kept showing up, it would balance out. But the moment I slipped, it was like I confirmed every ugly thing she ever believed about me." "You didn't confirm anything," I said. "You just exposed who she really is." He laughed bitterly. "I'm 43 years old, sleeping on my dad's couch. No savings, no leverage. Clara handled the money. Everything I earned went into a joint account. I don't even know where I'd start." "There are worse places than a couch," I said. He shook his head. "Eleanor said I was just like you. Worked my whole life and ended up with nothing." That was when I set my cup down. "There are things you don't know about me," I said. He frowned. "What do you mean?" I stood and went to the bookshelf in the living room. Behind a row of worn paperbacks sat a plain folder. I'd kept it there for years, untouched, but never forgotten. I brought it to the table and opened it in front of him. Inside were documents, statements, legal filings, investment summaries. Daniel blinked. "Dad, what is this?" "When my mother and I were young, we didn't have much," I said. "You remember that?" He nodded slowly. "I worked at the shipping warehouse for 3 decades, overtime, night shifts, whatever paid a little extra. Your mother cleaned houses, stitched clothes, saved every dollar she could. After she passed, I had some money left, not a fortune, just enough to make a choice. I slid one paper toward him. I chose to learn." He leaned in, reading. His eyes widened. "I started small, books from the library, free seminars, companies that made sense to me, things people would need 10, 20 years down the line. I invested quietly, patiently. I never told you because I wanted you to build your own strength." Daniel's voice was barely audible. "Dad, these numbers." "I know what they say." He leaned back, stunned. "You're wealthy." "I'm prepared," I corrected. "There's a difference." "But you still live here. You still drive that old sedan." "I live the life I want. Money is a tool, not an announcement." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Eleanor's family company, Whitmore Logistics." "Yes," I said, "I know it." "How?" "I pay attention. Whitmore Logistics has been bleeding contracts for years, debt piling up. They need an acquisition or they'll collapse." Daniel stared at me. "You've been watching them." "I've been watching a lot of things." I pulled out another document. Their biggest competitor, Northline Global, is expanding aggressively in Western Canada. They want Whitmore's distribution network. "And you're invested in Northline," he said slowly. "I'm their largest private shareholder." He looked at me like I was someone else entirely. "Who are you?" I smiled. "I'm your father. I just don't advertise." "So what happens now?" he asked. "I make a call, and you focus on getting back on your feet." The next morning, I made pancakes while Lily sat at the table in her pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction. "Grandpa," asked she suddenly, "are my mom and dad breaking up?" I paused. "I don't know, but whatever happens, you're safe, you're loved." She nodded, unconvinced. After breakfast, we fixed Saturn's rings together. She told me how the rings survived because they weren't rigid, they bent. That's how strong things last, she said seriously. Daniel woke later, showered, changed. We talked logistics, school runs, resumes, interviews. I told him I'd cover expenses. "I can't take your money," he said. "You're not taking it, you're borrowing time." That afternoon, I made the call. A week later, Clara started calling, wanting to talk, needing time. Daniel stood firm. "I won't come back unless you choose us. Lily deserves better." 2 weeks passed. Daniel landed a job, not perfect, but solid. Then the news broke. Whitmore Logistics had been acquired, and part of the deal included a public statement. Daniel read it online, hands shaking. "Dad, what did you do?" I said. I reminded someone that actions have consequences. That Friday, I put on my suit and went downtown, and Eleanor Whitmore finally learned who I was. The signing took place on the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking the harbor. Steel, marble, silence, the kind of room where people believed power lived. Eleanor Whitmore sat at the long table with her lawyers, shoulders rigid, jaw tight. The strain of holding a failing empire together showed in the fine lines she'd never bothered to hide behind kindness. I sat quietly near the window. She didn't notice me at first. She was too busy arguing over clauses that no longer mattered. Whitmore Logistics was finished. This deal was its last breath. Then the CEO of Northline Global cleared his throat. "Before we finalize," he said calmly, "there's one remaining condition." Eleanor snapped her head up. "What condition?" He slid a document across the table. "A public statement, issued immediately after acquisition." Her eyes skimmed the page. The color drained from her face. "This is unacceptable," she said. "An apology? For conduct? For attitudes?" "No statement," the CEO replied evenly. "No deal." She looked to her lawyers. They avoided her eyes. One leaned in and whispered the numbers. The truth landed hard. Without this agreement, her company would collapse within months, thousands unemployed, her legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. That's when she finally noticed me. "You," she hissed, "what are you doing here?" The CEO turned slightly. "Eleanor, this is Samuel Hart, Northline's largest private shareholder. This acquisition was structured at his request." Her face twisted. "You're Daniel's father." "I am." "You did this because of me." "I did this because of what you did to my son, to my granddaughter. You've ruined everything." "No," I said. "I saved your company. Your employees keep their jobs. You walk away wealthy. All you lose is the illusion that cruelty comes without cost." Her hands trembled as she signed. When it was done, she stood and walked out without another word. I never saw her again. That evening, I told Daniel everything. We sat in the same living room where he'd learned to read, where he'd once fallen asleep on the floor during cartoons. "You didn't do this for revenge," he said quietly. "No," I said. "I did it so you'd never doubt your worth again." "What about Clara?" "That's your choice," I said. "Just don't make it from fear." Clara called 2 days later. She'd seen the news, read the statement, understood finally what her mother had lost. "She knows it was you," Clara said. "She's furious." "Clara," Daniel said, steady and calm, "do you believe I'm worthy?" Silence. "Do you think I'm worthy?" she said at last. That was the answer. The divorce took months but not years. It was quiet, fair. Lily stayed with Daniel most of the time. I set up a trust for her education. No court fights, no bitterness, just distance. Lily bent. She didn't break. A year later, Daniel met Hannah. She taught music at Lily's school. She laughed easily. She listened. When Lily showed her the science trophy still sitting on my mantel, Hannah knelt to her level and asked about Saturn's rings like it was the most important thing in the world. That's how I knew. One night, after they left, I sat alone with my tea and thought about everything Eleanor Whitmore had believed, about power, about class, about names. She'd looked at my life and seen nothing worth respecting. She'd been wrong. I'd lived simply, worked hard, saved quietly, planned patiently. I never needed anyone to know what I had, because real wealth isn't about display. It's about capacity, about what you can do when the people you love are pushed into a corner. The money would outlive me. Some would go to Daniel and Lily, some to scholarships, to families starting over, to people who'd been told they weren't enough. But the real inheritance was already passed on. That worth isn't assigned by others. That family shows up. That starting over isn't failure. And that the quiet man in the corner is often the one holding all the cards. Eleanor Whitmore once asked whether my bloodline was worthy of hers. She never stopped to ask whether hers was worthy of us.